What's going on, everybody? It's Frito here for Your Overwatch. Huge experimental card just went live. This one aimed to tune the power level of a lot of things down a shade. The devs explained that after the past 4 years, they've released 50 major patches and even more balance-focused patches, which has led to some shifts in what would be considered the, quote, base power of heroes. While we don't expect these changes to address all the concerns, we want to take steps towards scaling back damage and healing outputs in a way that still allows heroes to feel impactful and fun to play. One interesting change in the mix of all of this is that all beam damage will be reduced further against armor than before, up to 30% damage reduction. So this one would be a buff to all characters with innate armor, tanks Torbjorn, Birgitta, in matchups up against Symmetra, Zarya, Echo, and if there's any other beams I'm forgetting about. Now onto the hero changes. Ana's ammo capacity goes from 14 to 12, and what you're going to notice with a lot of these changes is that they're trying to tune down the uptime of a lot of different things, and this is the first one getting hit. With all of these changes, you're going to want to consider overall output over the course of a team fight, and also ultimate generation for sure, because anytime you have to reload more, you'll be building ults more slowly, but also there's always that opportunity cost of maybe not having ammo when you need it, either because you feel you have to reload sooner or because you just run out. And that's a change that's pretty consistent across many of the changes here. Ashe's Viper as well goes down to 12 shots, and her aim down sights damage has been decreased to 80. This one I found very interesting because with a damage amp, a shot to the head will now do 208, whereas it used to do 221. So in squishy duels, Ashe with a pocket will still be able to one-tap you, but especially with continuous damage over time, pressuring down thicker targets, especially tanks, but also up against characters with 250 health, Mei, Reaper, Torb, and the like, Ashe won't be contributing the big heaps of damage that is kind of keeping her top of the meta. Being able to pick things off quick is good, but it's Ashe's volume of damage to pressure down the enemy as well as get Bob really quickly that I think is holding her at the top spot, not to mention the other buffs to the flexibility of the Viper, which she does still retain, but otherwise the break points still seem to be the same to me, though this 80 damage value will be more punishing to body shots, especially over time, against targets that are getting healed. For example, 3 body shots with the 80 damage value will do 240, whereas the old one did 255. So I can find some niche breakpoints there. 250 health point targets will survive 3 body shots, but I think especially pressuring down tanks while they're getting healing is where we're going to see the biggest difference. And also, all of the nerfs here will also help shielding quite a bit. When their ammo does have to hit a shield, it's more costly to the overall output, because although shields are weaker, when the enemy has less ammo to work with and needs to reload more, their impact raises, as you might be able to create some downtime where they have to reload for you to make a play while using a shield. I don't think it makes shields meta again or anything, but that's something to consider. Next up, hitting the Nerf hammer is Baptiste, whose biotic launcher nades have less ammo now, down to 10, but his regenerative burst heal goes way down, nerfed by half, at least for his team. He'll still receive the same amount to himself because they multiply at times 2, but to his team, regenerative burst only heals 75, and that's 75 total health. Over a 5-second duration, that's 15 health a second, so basically nothing on your teammates. Just enough to sort of heal up some chip damage. Absolutely massive nerf to Baptiste here, especially in his ability to heal tanks, because that was part of the reason why the spam meta tanks were so strong, at least for a while anyway, where Orisa Sig playing around a Baptiste made this like multi-turret comp where they all could shoot and play around each other's abilities really effectively. So now the healing for his team is so weak, you might be better off splitting off your team, similar to maybe how a Zenyatta might. And when you combine with his ammo going down as well, that's a double knock on Baptiste's healing capability. Next change is to Junkrat's frag launcher. The impact has been reverted back to 40, so now his damage will be 120 direct, which is really important to Junkrat's power level because his other 2 abilities combo with that breakpoint so well and will lack some risky breakpoints where up against a character like Reaper or Mei with 250 health, his nade and mine will no longer deal 250, it'll be back to doing 240, meaning he has to hit another ability in order to confirm that elim. Also, if a target with 200 health gets stuck in his trap but gets healed, because the trap does 80 and the mine does 120, if they receive any bit of healing, a nade or mine will not finish off a target in the trap. This is quite a big nerf to Junkrat, actually. It might look small, but between the breakpoints going down and his ult charge rate going down, Junkrat's gonna be moved a bit more to the situational category, at least on paper. And the next nerf is to McCree's primary fire. The Peacekeeper got reverted. They gave him a machine gun like a year ago or whatever it was in the power-up era of Overwatch. Well, now it's back to feeling very impactful when you use it. Aside from power level, I really like the feel of a lot of these abilities slowing down and being more methodical, because the super fire rate McCree, although helped him be viable when everything was getting superpower buffed, it also lost a bit of McCree's flavor because it became more about flicking like a madman as fast as possible, whereas this slower McCree is obviously weaker, but also more of a thinking man's McCree. A bit more sophisticated with how you have to time your shots, and I like the feel of it anyway. Some things to keep in mind, though, is with the stun nerf being retained, his follow-up shot after hitting a stun is even slower. I'm pretty sure you're going to struggle to hit the second shot at all, so you may have to fan the hammer on a stun target, especially if it's got a lot of health. And this nerf, although I like the direction and base point, might nerf McCree more than you think, because I think some of the other heroes didn't get hit as hard as McCree did. This one feels very significant to me, but perhaps if McCree's adjust to using Fan the Hammer a bit more against tanks rather than his primary fire, maybe the value of the stun is still good enough to keep McCree up and kicking as one of the top picks. Since, well, there's not a lot of shields, not a lot of protection, so stun gets pretty guaranteed value, and it's one of the more reliable backline characters to protect you from that kind of thing, so it'll be interesting. Next change is to Moira, who got a lot of changes. Don't get nervous, the team fade didn't go through this time, but kind of a complicated series of patch notes here, but there's two key takeaways where the healing resource consumption goes up significantly, so you lose resource a lot faster, but you also gain it faster when you're attaching to an enemy. But with that, the power of the heal has been reverted significantly, where the healing per second goes back up to 70 like it used to, but the lingering heal gets reduced by half, so it only lasts 2 seconds. Kind of a advanced Moira tip. A lot of players might not even know this, but when you sprayed a teammate with healing, it used to just last on them for 4 seconds. So you could spray a teammate and walk away and they'd still get healed for quite a while. Well, now that'll only be 2 seconds. So you'll have to have much more continuous touching distance with your teammates in order to keep them alive. And in doing that, they're kind of compressing Moira's power, where there's a bigger spike of healing, but it doesn't last as long, which is kind of how Moira feels closer to launch. A bit more of a bursty playstyle rather than a I live forever kind of thing. So when you're pocketing a thing, you'll be healing more, but since the lingering effect is nerfed so much, you're going to heal a lot less overall, at least for the amount of resource you have. So as with all of these efficiency nerfs, if I'm not mistaken, it should take much more to get coalescence with this change, which is important because before, if you played Moira correctly, by the time you lost your resource, you should always have coal, at least in that first team fight. Now, I don't think that's actually possible, and you'll have to be draining the enemy with Biotic Grasp much earlier than you're used to and have much more of that give and take playstyle where you have to combine damage in order to get your healing power back, which in this big rework, the Biotic Grasp alternate fire attaching onto enemies has finally got that reduction. I believe all of this is going through to live, if I had to guess, since they've played around with this Moira rework a few different times, always including the attach angle reduction, meaning that you have to track characters a lot more closely. So with the combination of that and harsher management of her abilities, this is ultimately the direction I believe Moira is going to be going, with Blizzard's intention to make her a bit more skillful. Well, now you have a much more challenging management of resources in order to get your value. Next change is to Orisa, buffed this time. They must have felt that they nerfed her into the ground in the last patch, where the Halt radius has been increased from 4 to 5. Keep in mind that it originally was at 7, which is bigger than Grav. Now it's 1 less than Grav, which seems reasonable for an ability on a cooldown. The number change is only 1, but as you can see here, you can pull the training bot off of the map, which means that not only do a bunch of environmental kills become possible yet again, between the big radius increase, because remember, that's in every direction like a sphere, it becomes a much bigger hitbox in all directions, and they also reduce the speed of it down to 25, because I think that faster move speed of it was just too hard to land, and also, since it moves a bit slower and has a bigger radius, it's easier to dodge at the same time, so a bit more of a reasonable point in between the original super strong state and the nerf state. I'd keep a close eye on Orisa because she's really weak right now, but this Halt might be at the value that you can play around it reliably enough to get close to that old impact and shake up the metagame, at least for ranked anyway. Next change is to Pharah, whose recovery rate increases from 0.75 to 0.85. Pharah, like McCree, is one of those characters that has been just buffed repeatedly in order to try to keep up with the times, with either hit scans being really strong or healing, stacking, and sustain super strong in the GOATS era. Now, like McCree, Pharah's fire rate goes back to more of a methodical pace. Now, this change is interesting because you might think this is a massive nerf, but you got to keep in mind that McCree and Ashe both got nerfed as well. And, well, when we talk about characters that are receiving healing up against pressure damage, well, Pharah typically has a Mercy healing her. And Mercy has that healing buff from a few patches ago. So I'm going to say Pharah actually is a winner in this patch, even though this nerf looks brutal, because now I think Ashe might struggle to multi-body shot her, and McCree definitely will with his reduced fire rate. Those two characters especially were able to delete Pharah out of the sky before she really could make a play. So with the increased movement speed that you got in the previous patch, as well as Mercy healing to really break the threshold of pressure damage on her, as well as overall damage going down a bit, Pharah kind of wins because her damage was a bit too slow and inefficient. Well, a lot of other damage types have scaled down to be more akin to the speed that she plays. Big victory contextually, despite the nerf, because I think a lot of times you have to pace your shots anyway in order to hit them from range, so this only really nerfs one aspect of Pharah's playstyle when she's like in cleanup mode. Next nerf is to Symmetra, who, much like Junkrat, has her max damage reduced down to 120 on the secondary fire orb spam. This is the type of change where I don't think you can really address the current meta and everything. It's more of a global theme they're trying to tune with Symmetra, but she's probably the worst character in the game right now because she's so bad up against the tank line that exists and just the bursty nature of everything. So unfortunately, Sim had to catch an L while they scale everything back. However, Sim is really going to struggle until the game slows down enough where tanks that add protection are viable again, because right now it's all about tanks that deal damage, and so Sim doesn't have tanks to protect her, or if you do run tanks that protect her, they just get shredded anyway by the tanks that deal damage. So it's kind of a lose-lose for Sim until the meta shifts, I would say. Change to Widowmaker that might surprise you. High-level players have been begging for Widowmaker to get nerfed for a long time, and well, here is a set of nerfs for you. Her ammo has been reworked where she has more ammo, so she can primary fire SMG for 5 more shots. Not that that matters too much. Instead, her secondary fire scoped cost goes up, which means she used to have 10 shots before she reloaded. Now she'll only have 7. And on top of that, she'll now have a range fall off. Now, it was super difficult to try to find a range in the training range for this to actually matter, but from 60 to 85 meters, you will now scale up to 50% damage fall off. So at super long ranges, you'll be doing half the damage you used to. Keeping in mind, Widow deals 300 damage to the head. In this demonstration, you actually can see the magic point where the distance I'm standing or the bot spawn range either does 200 damage, just enough to kill a squishy, or just under that if I step a little bit farther back. So on one hand, there's a lot of ranges where this obviously won't matter because it begins so far away. On the other hand, Widow is a sniper character who wants to fight at long range. So on certain maps, like let's say Ilios Ruins, that have these super long sight lines, Widow's definitely going to feel it, but it is really map specific. I would say characters with 200 or 50 health points or more will definitely feel this. And once in a while as a squishy, you might be at that magical range or charge up time, because remember, Widow does less damage if she doesn't charge up fully at those super long ranges. So there are some magic points where you won't die to a headshot from Widow as any character. But I think especially tanks who really have to stand out in front, go scout and figure out where the engagement's going to happen anyway. At all levels of play, I felt Widow had a really easy time pinging them from range at super long distance to just farm up ult or chunk them down before the fight even starts, forcing them to like retreat and have inactivity, where the difference between doing 300 damage to a tank in one shot and 150, I mean, that's totally different, right? 150 is nothing. A lot of times isn't enough to kill a squishy, and a tank might just peel that off. So long story short, I think a lot of maps where Widow has been a staple in Overwatch for years, that might not feel so required anymore now that her power level goes down significantly on those super Widow-friendly maps. But to be honest, she'll still be good. It's just she's been tuned down slightly. I think there's a chance that this really niche case doesn't come up often enough and maybe holds Widow down a bit, but probably will still be top meta on those maps. Next one, very similar. They're reverting Zarya's particle cannon ammo cost on her alternate fire. So now there are 4 shots before you reload instead of 5. Quite a big nerf, actually. Really, really big deal. A huge percentage of Zarya's gameplay and being maximized is her ammo management. So because of that, now with the number reverted back to launch era, it's much more costly to weave in alternate fire to build ult, because back in the day anyway, Zarya's Graviton Surge was one of the slowest building ultimates in the game, but when she's able to poke from range, especially when she gets up to high charge, 5 shots a reload, she kind of always can be doing damage with either the beam or the alt fire. Now, more times you'll be stuck in the reload animation, not being able to pound in that beam damage. And remember, beam damage got nerfed up against armor, so that's like a double hit against Zarya, because I think she has the most relevant to the meta beam damage type. So up against characters like Orisa, Diva, Reinhardt that have inherent armor, her beam's going to be worse. So kind of slowing down her carry potential, and it's going to force you to be much more methodical with how you play Zarya, which is sort of the running theme of this patch, isn't it? But with that one covered, that's everything in the patch. Quite a big knock up against power. As the developers say, this possibly isn't enough to shift the game down to a less punishing playstyle, but it is a step in the right direction where, with a lot of characters' uptime being reduced, your decision-making becomes more important because there's less room for error if you're rushing shots or playing a bit too fast. Also, last thing to point out for the video, the season is about to be ending in 10 days. Season 23 will close, so make sure you get your games in before then. Other than that, that's been it for today's video, guys. I hope you guys did enjoy it. If you did, please be sure to leave it with a like. It really does help us out and lets us know that you're enjoying the content. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and be sure to hit the bell icon next to the subscribe button so that you actually get notified when our videos go live. Link to the description is our Twitter, where we tweet out news, updates, and dank memes. That's been it for me. I've been Frito for Your Overwatch. We'll see you guys next time.